AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Brett Johnson joining you here on a Tuesday afternoon. And as usual on Tuesdays, we have our weekly conversations with one of the great members of the staff at the Minnesota Reformer, who's a great resource for the latest in Minnesota news and politics, especially as we are only 1 week away from the election taking place. Great resource to find everything you need to make sure you're getting the news and making sure you're finding out what's happening with Republicans and Democrats as they continue to campaign. So go to minnesotareformer.com. Well, today we're going to be following a theme of, Republicans getting themselves in Minnesota in controversy and in many controversial situations. And we're going to start off talking about Senator Nathan Wesenberg and some controversy that he has been involved with regarding a social media post. And joining us to talk about that is Michelle Griffith over at the Minnesota Reformer, as she is one of the writers at the Minnesota Reformer who covers Minnesota politics with a focus on marginalized communities in the state. Michelle, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as I said, we're going to be diving into this story that really has been causing a big stir in Minnesota's educational and political spheres, because recently Senator Nathan Wesenberg, who's a Republican from Little Falls, posted inflammatory accusations on Facebook about a public school teacher in his district named John Shipman. Now, in a post that included Shipman's photo, Wesenberg claimed that Shipman and other teachers were teaching students inappropriate sexual content, sparking outrage from Education Minnesota, which is the state's teachers union. The union has demanded that Wesenberg retract his statements, calling them false and clearly libelous. Now, in an update to this story from yesterday, Senator Wesenberg has deleted his Facebook post after the Reformer published their story yesterday afternoon. So as I said, Michelle's going to be joining us to talk a little bit more about this controversy with Wesenberg. So can you give us a little bit of an overview of what happened between Wesenberg and Malacca teacher John Shipman as outlined in your article? What can you tell us about the content of Wesenberg's recent Facebook post and the specific allegations he made against Shipman that has really been causing all sorts of controversy?
Yeah, so last year, this whole incident stirs from something that occurred last year during last legislative session. Senator Wesenberg met with 3 Malacca teachers from, that are in his district, and they were there to advocate for more special education funding. And at the time, they wrote an account of their events, which differ a little bit from Wesenberg's, but they say that Wesenberg was aggressive in that meeting, and when they mentioned they were associated with Education Minnesota, the conversation went downhill. They say that Wesenberg started shouting at them and talking about how teachers are indoctrinating students and ranting about how sex education is taught in schools. And then so for some reason, so that occurred last year, and for some reason, Senator Wesenberg earlier this month, 2 weeks ago, posted an update on his official Senate Facebook page about this incident, which included a photo of one of the teachers in that meeting, John Shipman, and some text about what he says occurred at that meeting. And in that post, which is now deleted, he said that, Senator Wesenberg keeps several pornographic books in his office to highlight the point that these books, he says, are available for students in public schools. And he was talking to the teachers about this, and he was saying that the teachers wanted to teach kids inappropriate sexual conduct. And he went into a bunch of graphic language on his official page that I won't get into. But so he says that, he was upset about that, and then he threw the teachers out of the office. And, of course, this differs from what the teachers say, who say that they just kind of felt like it kind of came out of the blue. It was really random. So it was just an unusual incident for the teachers. And then yesterday morning, Education Minnesota sent a demand letter to Senator Wesenberg saying, remove the Facebook post or issue a retraction. Otherwise, you could be, liable for potential libel litigation. And even though the post is taken down, that's still the case. This is a private citizen being called out on a public forum. So the standards for defamation are a little bit lower than a public figure. But so it was just a very unusual incident that I'm not sure why Senator Wesenberg wanted to bring it up again, even though it happened a year ago. He didn't answer my calls or respond to my text message. So I'm unsure why he's bringing it up now. But it was just overall a pretty bizarre incident and something that Senator Wesenberg decided to write about on his official page.
I think you largely just answered my next question, but was there any word on why he decided to finally delete that post today, or has it still largely been kind of radio silence from both him and even from the Republican Party at large? Because I was also going to ask if the Republican Party in Minnesota has commented on this at all, either.
No, I haven't received any comment from Senate Republicans, Senator Wesenberg. It's all been pretty silent, except that I did notice, maybe about an hour or 45 minutes or so after the Reformer story was published, that Facebook post was removed. And I was just looking online, and it does look like Senator Wesenberg is pretty, it doesn't look like he takes down a lot of posts. Like if you look at his Facebook page, he does say a lot of questionable in facts and inflammatory statements about Democrats and political figures, and he doesn't take those down. So I think it is unusual for him to remove a Facebook post, and I would have to guess it had to be to do with that letter or the Reformer story if I were to just guess about it.
Well, there are a couple of interesting legal implications that I want to get into with you. And the first one would be that you note that Shipman's attorney in this case has advised him not to comment, which may imply possible legal action. So what are some of the potential legal implications for Wesenberg here? As he said, I know he is a public official, or it may be kind of a gray area as to whether he meets that definition of a public official, but what sorts of legal implications could we have in this potential case?
Yeah, so Senator Wesenberg is definitely a public official. He's an elected Minnesota representative. He's been in the Senate for about 2 years now. So there's no question that Senator Wesenberg is a public official.
So just to be clear, I want to back up. So that doesn't make a difference whether it's a federal or a state official, correct?
No, correct.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. Sorry, just want to be clear on that, yeah.
Yeah. But then John Shipman, the Malacca science teacher that Senator Wesenberg posted about, that Mr. Shipman is not a public official. So with defamation and libel laws, there are different standards for public citizens and private citizens. If you're a public official, like a celebrity or a state senator, there's a higher standard that a person needs to meet to accuse that person of libel, just because, there are a lot of social media posts and people can say a lot of things about public officials. So, there has to be like malicious intent, actual malice, these legal, standards that you need to meet in order to win a defamation suit against a public official. And those standards are a little bit lower for a private official. I think you still need the actual malice, publishing knowingly false content with malice. I think that is still a standard, but it is a little bit different. So I think Senator Wesenberg is liable, for a potential libel lawsuit. And because he posted it from his official Senate account, this also could implicate the Minnesota Senate itself. My editor, Reformer editor Patrick Kulikin, tried to look into that a little bit yesterday. He contacted the longtime head Senate counsel, he's now retired, who worked at the Minnesota Senate for 40 years. And he asked him, is the Minnesota Senate liable with Wesenberg's post? And he said, I'm not sure, but, if I were Mr. Shipman's attorney, I would definitely be looking into that. So I think Senator Wesenberg has opened himself up and potentially the Minnesota Senate itself up to litigation.
Yeah, because that's massive. If he was posting this, or if he was posting this from his official Senate account, that's very different if he had published that from his campaign account or even a personal account. Because, as you said, now the entire state Senate is potentially facing exposure. Now, I know we're not entirely sure as to whether the Senate could be facing any legal action, but I'm sure that's probably going to be getting the attention of some members of the legislature. But so far, we haven't received any comment from them on their end. Correct?
Yeah, correct. Nothing so far.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to follow along. We'll have to see if something does materialize because, as I was saying, publishing that from the official Senate account could definitely expose not only Wesenberg but also the entire state Senate, as you mentioned, to some potential legal action. Read more about what Michelle wrote about Senator Wesenberg over at MinnesotaReformer.com, MinnesotaReformer.com. Also want to briefly touch on another article that you wrote about last week that has to do with another Republican making some inflammatory and controversial statements, because in a recent speech to a church group last week, Representative Walter Hudson, who is a Republican from Alfredville, sparked some controversy by discussing the duty to challenge a tyrannical government, which were comments that some have interpreted as advocating for a rebellion here in our country. Now, Hudson has also criticized Democratic policies on abortion and paid leave, and later at this event he clarified that he was not supporting violence or overthrowing the government, calling his statements a teaser for an upcoming constitutional training class. The speech has drawn sharp criticism from the DFL, who are calling on the Republicans to disavow Hudson's remarks. So, Michelle, can you provide us a little more background on Representative Hudson's recent speech and his specific comments on duty to change government if it becomes tyrannical? Because I'm curious how he's tried to clarify or at least defend these remarks since they were made last week.
Yeah, so on October 18th, Representative Walter Hudson spoke at the Word of Life Ministries Church in Princeton. And that church has this faith and freedom group, which holds regular meetings about the intersection of religion and politics. And I believe they meet about once a month. And they have speakers that come in to talk about, Republican values and, religion, as well as get an update on where things stand with the state legislature. On October 18th, Representative Hudson spoke there for about 45 minutes, and it wasn't until last week, however, that his remarks made a splash on social media because the left-leaning site called Heartland Signal posted a video clip of Representative Hudson's speech on X, formerly Twitter. And that went viral. And in that short clip, it was about a 45-second clip, he said that, quote, when a system of government becomes tyrannical, the people have not just the right, but the duty to change their form of government. It doesn't say anything about waiting for 2 years for the next election, end quote. And, out of context, those statements look very inflammatory, and it does look like he's advocating for a political tyranny or some sort of overthrowing of government. But when I called him, he, unequivocally denied that he was advocating for any of that, any overturning of government, any violence, anything like that. He says that he was, quoting the Declaration of Independence, and he was giving the church group attendees a teaser of what they could hear in a training in November. So this specific church group next month is going to have a constitutional training where they're going to learn how to assert the Constitution by writing formal petitions to elected officials to protest, conduct that they say is unconstitutional. So they're basically just going to be learning how to almost write letters to elected officials with, fancy constitutional arguments in those letters. And so Representative Hudson was saying that, I was just, giving them a preview for what they could be hearing in that, constitutional training. So he says that, it's not anything advocating for political violence. He says that he denounces the violence that happened on January 6th, 2021. He doesn't support those things whatsoever. And his remarks also did, garner some additional, scrutiny because Representative Hudson was recently hired by the Minnesota Republican Party as its outreach and engagement coordinator. So Representative Hudson has been going around the state and, stomping for Republicans and trying to advocate for former President Donald Trump and flipping the Minnesota House to Republican. So Walter Hudson, now he has quite a following on Twitter, and I think he's becoming a more established name. He's a first-term representative, so he was just elected 2 years ago. But he is working with the party now, and he's trying to make a name for himself in various ways.
So I think final question on this would be when people look through and see that he's talking about people having a duty to challenge a tyrannical government, and then he mentions that it was only a teaser for November constitutional training classes that are going to be put on by Faith and Freedom. I think a lot of people might do the math and think, well, isn't this something about another Stop the Steal type movement? So I'd like to get a little more detail about this because, as you said, this sounds like it's just going to be a constitutional writing class, but I think as people end up doing the math, they're afraid, well, is this going to be kind of a Stop the Steal effort? So he said, though, this is just purely constitutional writing class that's coming up in November, correct?
Yeah, so I was able to watch so that group live streams their meetings. I was able to watch a 45-minute, or like an hour or so video of the entire meeting itself, not for when just Representative Hudson spoke. And one of the group organizers for that church group did say, it didn't appear to me that they were advocating for, some sort of election challenge post, election day. It did seem like they were basically going to try to learn some arguments and how to write in a way that they could challenge their current elected officials through official-looking letters and try to come up with constitutional arguments for, content or things that they see their elected officials doing that they find objectionable and that they think is unconstitutional. To me, and to what this group organizer said, it just appeared that they were going to learn, how to form these arguments, how to send in these kinds of letters. It didn't appear to me like it was any kind of, organized effort to overturn the 2024 election results.
Well, you can read more about what Michelle wrote with Walter Hudson and then also this recent post talking about Senator Nathan Wesenberg and the controversy he's faced over a recent social media post. Find those both at MinnesotaReformer.com, as well as the other great stories they're working on over at MinnesotaReformer.com for the best in Minnesota news and politics. We have been speaking with Michelle Griffith, who covers Minnesota politics and policy for the Reformer with a focus on marginalized communities. Again, make sure you go to MinnesotaReformer.com. Michelle, appreciate the time today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, let's take a break and send things back over to Matt McNeil on AM 950.